Dahr Jamail is on the line with us, investigative journalist and staff reporter with Truthout. He's the author of his latest, co-written with William Rivers Pitt, The Mass Destruction of Iraq, the Disintegration of a Nation, Why It's Happening, and Who is Responsible. And also, Climate Disruption, Depression, and 2013 Emissions Set New Records. A lot of stuff here. Dahr, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. You're doing such great work, and I'm so pleased that you can join us today. Where would you like to start? You want to get into the climate change stuff, the Iraq stuff? Both?
I think the climate change stuff was, it's. I mean, both are obviously extremely pertinent, but I think this one's a bit of a bigger story.
Okay, go for it. Tell us the story.
Well, the dispatch covers so much. What I try to do is basically go around the world and give readers a general overview of how fast things are changing, how profoundly and dramatically, and that goes from covering major weather events, record temperatures, highs and lows being set, record flooding and this kind of thing, but also, some of the recent announcements. For example, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, not exactly a bastion of liberal thinking. It was an extremely conservative working energy group, and they have said recently that coal is on track to overtake oil as being the dominant world energy source by 2017, so just a few years from now, and without a major shifting away from coal, that basically puts us on track for global temperatures to increase by 6 degrees Celsius by 2050. I mean, this is, things are happening so much faster than we thought, because that's actually basically twice as fast as the IPCC worst case scenario that puts us on track for a 6 degree C increase by 2100 if we continue on business as usual as we are today, which of course we are. So things are happening even faster now than the worst case scenario for the IPCC. And that's just talking about one report. And that's despite the fact that, this kind of dramatic, but still largely symbolic policy shift with with the U.S. and China, with Obama meeting with the head of the state of China, saying, look, we're in agreement for these cuts. But again, these are just all non-binding and really symbolic at this point, when in reality, things were so far progressed with climate change that nothing short of really full-scale stop of using all fossil fuels with, government mandates, taxation, et cetera, basically using any means necessary to make this happen. We are on track for, 6 degrees C by 2100, or possibly even much higher than that.
And I don't know if you saw the documentary that I helped write and narrate, and Leo DiCaprio narrated, called Last Hours. It's a little 10-minute video. It's over at the greenworldrising.org website. But we documented how the Permian mass extinction, which killed 95% of all life, was kicked off by a 6 degree increase in temperature. The PETM, the Permian Eocene thermal maximum, which was roughly a 40 or 50% of all life on Earth extinction event, it was probably less than 6 degrees that initiated that, and it may have taken as little as 13 years for that thing to roll into place. So when you say 6 degrees Celsius, I get really nervous.
I'm really glad you bring those up, Tom, because you're one of the few people that are talking about this, and I try to bring it into my dispatches at least every other month to remind people of what's at stake and how catastrophic the situation is going to get, short of really dramatic changes, which I see nothing politically to indicate that these could ever happen in the U.S. or really anywhere else around the world, given capitalism and fossil fuel-based economies. And the reality, just to go into a little bit more detail, that you talk about the Permian mass extinction, and you've written about it. It's in your film, it's in your articles, you've written about it in books, and I've written about this as well, because what is so disconcerting is that the Permian mass extinction occurred over tens of thousands of years, which is still geologically a very, very short amount of time, and yet what we've done by emitting so much CO2 into the atmosphere, which is already melting the methane hydrates in the Arctic and causing a large amount of methane to be released already. We already see the vents widening. We already see the bubbles coming up off the coast of the north coast of Alaska and Siberia as this is melting in the shallow waters of the Arctic, particularly in the summers, releasing methane, which is kicking things into overdrive because methane's 100 times as powerful as CO2 on a short time scale, and still 20 times as powerful over a 100-year time scale. And this is just ramping things up, and this is exactly what happened during the Permian mass extinction, sending these multiple positive feedback loops into warming the environment even faster. And we're already seeing that now. And despite that hard evidence right there in front of us in the material world, we have things like I just mentioned that coal's on track to overtake oil. Of course, coal generating even more CO2s than the burning of oil, and just things speeding up rapidly, and really nothing on deck to show us that this is going to be changed.
Yeah, I may be wrong in my recollection. It might have been somebody else, but I think that Jesse Ventura, remember when he had that TV show of kind of wild and wacky stuff in the world, conspiracy theory of the week sort of thing. But very often he was highlighting things that were, fairly provable and fascinating, obscure. And one of his shows, as I recall, and it might have been somebody else's, but I'm pretty sure it was his show, was he tracked down a bunch of billionaires who have built basically little mini cities underneath their mansions. I mean, some billionaires got 1,000 acres in Kansas, and it looks like there's just a normal house up there, but there's actually 100 feet underground, a greenhouse and 30 bedrooms and servants' quarters and water purification and a lot of this mentality started out during the Cold War as fallout shelters. But do you think that some of these oil barons, these guys who are making billions on this, just think that they can ride this out?
I think they do. I think that they really do believe that their money will protect them, and just as you just described perfectly. And of course, this is ridiculous. I mean, evolutionary biologist Guy McPherson, who I've quoted pretty heavily in a lot of my articles when we start talking about the possibility of near-term human extinction. And he basically says, look, I paraphrase one of his quotes. He says, look, if you think the economy is more important than the environment, try holding your breath while you count your money.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I know Guy, he's been on this program a number of times. I think he's upset with me right now because I still have a little bit of hope, and Guy is like, there's no hope. But this is serious stuff. We're talking with Dahr Jamail, investigative journalist and staff reporter with Truthout, the author most recently of The Mass Destruction of Iraq and also Climate Disruption Depression. We have just a minute, Dahr, until we hit a break here. You can stay with us after the break, right?
Sure.
Okay, great. In that minute, though, any suggestions?
I think people need to look soberly at what's actually happening and start to think about what else do I need to do. We are at that point in history where nothing short of people stepping completely outside of their comfort zone and outside of their boxes and think about what can I do to try to work to save species that are going extinct at a rate of between 150 and 200 per day, in addition to taking care of myself while we move forward.
Yeah, this is way beyond replacing light bulbs. This requires massive action, which means we have to turn governments. So, at least in my opinion. Well, I get your take on that. We're talking with Dahr Jamail. We'll be back with Dahr in just a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with Dahr Jamail. Dahr, I've got you listed as truthout.org. Is there a Dahr Jamail website?
I do have dahrjamail.net, but, truthout.org is totally sufficient.
Okay, thanks. We're back. We're talking with Dahr Jamail, investigative journalist, staff reporter over at Truthout. Author, just one of the most solid, knowledgeable guys working in this field today. Dahr, you brought up Guy McPherson, who is pretty upfront saying we're in hospice. We just need to get along with each other because there's not going to be a third generation of humans. On the other hand, you've got the IPCC and a lot, the consensus of the scientists around the world seems to be that we've got maybe 20, 30 years before, we're in a screaming emergency state. Michael Mann is talking about how 2 degrees is freaky dangerous, and we're going to hit that within a decade and a half. He had a good piece in Scientific American. He's been on this program several times. Jim Hansen, who has now kind of stepped out of the public limelight, but just wrote a brilliant book to his daughter, essentially, is saying 1 degree is deadly, and we're at 0.8 of a degree right now, and that this 2 degree is a political number, not a scientific number. You've really spent a lot of time digging into this. What's your sense of where we're actually at right now?
I think I would say of all those people that you mentioned, I am probably closest in my analysis of the situation to Guy McPherson's take. That if we look at the historical precedents that we've seen, that you and I talked about at the beginning of the hour, and what we've done, which far surpasses the triggering events that led to those disasters or those mass extinction events, and I don't see how we get out of this. But that said, there is always the X factor, is since we've never been here before as a species, is we don't know. And so I don't, not from necessarily a hopeful perspective, but I think given that there is this unknown X factor and we don't know what's going to come or how fast it's going to happen, I feel like we're morally obliged to ourselves and to the other species on the planet to do everything that we can to try to mitigate this the best that we're able to.
So we're sort of at that situation, that Braveheart moment where the giant army is coming, but damn it, we're going to stand our ground. Or the guys in Masada, that one didn't turn out so well either, though. But fight on and do what we have to do.
I agree. I do. I think we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the other species on the planet, and if there are going to be generations after us, we have to do what we can. And me personally, the way I look at it is, when I'm in my 80s, if I live that long, and a person from a younger generation comes up and says, "Hey, wow, when you grew up, there was still ice in the Arctic during the summers. There were still glaciers on the big mountain ranges across the planet." And all these other species that were like polar bears and great white sharks and other species that were still alive and hadn't gone extinct yet. What did you do during 2014 or 2015 to try to mitigate that and save some of this so that it might still be around when my generation came up? And I want to be able to say, look, I fought. I did everything I could. I wrote articles. I wrote books. I gave talks. Went on radio and TV, and I did everything I could to wake people up and made dramatic shifts in my own personal life to try to make things a little bit better.
Yeah, there you go. I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. We'll be back in just a second with Dahr Jamail, investigative journalist, staff reporter with Truthout, author of The Mass Destruction of Iraq, Climate Disruption, Depression, and 2013 Emissions Set New Records. Is that the title of that second article, Dahr?
It is.
Yeah,
that's
okay,
right.
Great. We'll be right back with this. Stick around. 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think that we can say with some certainty that that there's a consensus or an agreement between Dahr and I that this is probably the biggest issue that the human race has ever faced, and it's certainly the biggest issue that we face now, and that we need to do something about it. And there's a whole variety of things that we can do. This being climate change. That said, Dahr, where do you think that we should all be beginning?
I think, for starters, begin at home, start cutting out the use of fossil fuels in our own life, traveling less, using a bicycle, doing things at home to start there, because how big of a hypocrite am I going to be if I go out and I'm talking to you like I am right now, and yet I'm driving around in some big car and not cutting down my travel bit by bit, and that's what I've tried to do, and I'm fortunate I've been able to solarize my house live basically in the woods, and cutting out my travel and not having two cars but one, and working to get rid of that one, riding a bicycle, starting to grow my own food, this kind of thing. I mean, starting there and then going out and working with other people doing the same thing, and trying to really apprise people and keep people up to date on exactly how far along we are, that this is urgent. You know, just because you're not seeing this right in front of your face per se, you're not one of the 5 million people annually dying because of climate change and things related to climate change. That doesn't take away any of the sense of urgency that I think we all have to have and be acting with in our lives. I mean, it's piling up as we speak. I mean, NASA announced August was the hottest August ever recorded in history. September was the hottest September ever recorded in history. And then the Japanese Meteorological Agency just came out and said the same thing about October. And of course, overall, 2014 is on track to, I'm going to be shocked if it's not also the hottest year ever recorded on history. So things are unraveling. You know, another report came out that I mentioned in my dispatch, how, you know, the Amazon rainforest has been degraded to the point where it's losing its ability to regulate weather as it's always done. You know, the Amazon's long been known, as you've written about, Tom, you know, it's the lungs of the planet. And, you know, it's going away before our very eyes. And so just because we can't see that and we're not living in it per se, you know, this is happening, and we need to read this information and take it in and understand the impact of that and begin acting accordingly.
One of the other largest consumers of carbon is war. War is an incredible consumer of carbon, from the manufacture of war materiel to the transportation of warriors to you know, to all the fossil fuels fueling the jets and the planes and everything, and aircraft carriers, whatnot, all this sort of stuff. Which brings us to the amazing reporting you've been doing on Iraq. What is the situation there right now?
Well, catastrophe, it's an overused term, but I really can't think of one more appropriate. I mean, on any given day, we're looking at between 50 and 350 people being killed. I mean, just think about that. Think about how would the media here report on that if in random violence and car bombings and gun attacks, if between 50 and 350 people were being killed in this country, and it was being reported as such. I mean, it's really amazing to me, as well as the lack of context. We need to talk about and remember that Iraq looks exactly the way it does today directly because of the U.S. policies there before, during, and after the occupation. And this includes what the Obama administration is doing as far as recently doubling the number of American troops there. We already have troops up on front lines in areas where there's fighting, increasing the number of airstrikes and increasing a U.S. presence. When, you know, talk about dumping gasoline on a runaway fire, that's exactly what this policy is doing. Never mind the fact that the U.S. really orchestrated dividing the country, divide and conquer, orchestrating the sectarian-based death squads, and really setting up things so that a group like ISIS could move in and have the type of popular support it does on the ground and establish a foothold in a better part of the country.
I think it was Carl Jung who said that the brutalized will eventually become the brutalizers. To what extent do you think that the brutality that we inflicted on Iraq in 2003 and during the decade-long occupation after that has created ISIS?
Well, that's exactly what we're seeing, because the U.S., from the beginning of the occupation, installed and backed basically Shia Saddams, is how I've heard them referred to from Iraqis, where, you know, the main one being Nouri al-Maliki, the previous prime minister, who literally was called out by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch for setting up Sunni-based, Shia-based death squads and running these secret detention facilities where Sunnis were literally rounded up and tortured and oftentimes killed. And so then, you know, it had a history of going into Sunni areas like Fallujah, Ramadi, targeting people, doing home raids, detentions, throwing them in prisons where these horrible things were happening to them. The pleas from the Sunnis for this to stop, for the human rights to be respected, went unheard for years. Enter a group called ISIS that all of a sudden expels these death squads in the Iraqi military from these primarily Sunni areas. So guess who's going to get popular support? Okay, they're obviously not the type of group that people want to be involved with, but if they stop the direct attacks from the the government that are basically persecuting Sunnis, they're going to get popular support, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, there was a reporter for one of the big networks who either got into or was talking to somebody who had just gotten out of one of the, I don't know if it was Fallujah or Mosul, one of the cities that ISIS has taken over, major cities, who said that, as soon as they took over, basically life got back to normal, and people, it was a new normal, women are covered and blah-de-blah, but no dancing allowed. But at least, the water came on and the electricity came on, and people were pretty pleased with that, which seems bizarre, I think, but to most Americans. How could that be?
Well, it is. And, people in this country don't understand what it's like to have to live with, if I go out, I might not come home tonight, because that's how much violence is racking.
Or to live without a functioning government.
Exactly.
This this is the Ronald Reagan world. You want a libertarian paradise? Yeah, look at Iraq. Amazing. Dahr Jamail, investigative journalist, staff reporter over at Truthout, author of The Mass Destruction of Iraq. More recently, a piece on climate disruption. You can read it over at truthout.org. Dahr, thanks so much for being with us today.
Always a pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
And for the great work you're doing. It's really super.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.